So just to go over the format of tonight's meeting again, this meeting is being held remotely via Zoom, also being broadcast on YouTube. For those of you who are in the audience and want to speak on either of the topics on tonight's agenda, you can either raise your hand, use the chat, or use the *9 feature. Tonight's meeting will have a couple of new business items that are discussion items and no formal action by the Planning Commission other than recommending potentially to continue moving forward with a couple of zoning ordinance text amendments. One of those is to consider a text amendment regarding lot coverage for ability for unenclosed roof structures to cover a certain additional area beyond the ordinance limits on industrial sites. And the other set of ordinances pertains to senior housing, tightening up some of the language in senior housing regarding minimum required dwelling unit floor area and signage in senior housing. So again, it's a discussion-based meeting tonight. And with that, I will turn the agenda over to our chair, Carol Thompson.
Thanks, Director Powers. Good evening. Welcome to Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, March 10th of 2021. We'll start with a roll call, please. Ms. Harmon?
Jeff Jar.
Here.
Brian Cullen.
Here.
Brian Kelly.
Here.
Nadina Atchison. Sherry Budd.
Here.
Joan Franzoy.
Here.
Carol Thompson.
Here. Thank you so much. There's an agenda before us. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair, motion to approve the agenda.
I'll support. Support Commissioner Cullen. And we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Joan Franzoy.
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes. Thank you. And next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the regular meeting of February 24th of 2021. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Commissioner
Madam
Kelly.
Chair, I support.
Support Commissioner Jar. Any corrections or changes? Have a roll call vote, please.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes.
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Joan Franzoy.
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes. We'll move right into new business, item number 1. It is a discussion of lot coverage zoning ordinance text amendment. The proposed amendments that would revise the definitions of lot coverage under section 2.102 definitions and regulations related to lot coverage under section 4.103 footnotes to schedule of regulations of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance in order to relax lot coverage requirements related to enclosed roofed structures. We first have a presentation from staff. Director Powers, are you introducing the amendments?
I will just briefly say that this is a continuation of the discussion that the Planning Commission, had on February 24th. We took some recommendations, including focusing our previous idea for this zoning ordinance text amendment to specifically industrial sites, and made some other tweaks to the language we had originally proposed. So with that, I would like to actually turn this over to our principal planning consultant, Vidya Krishnan, to talk about the specifics of the new proposed ordinance language. And then I'll talk about next steps, potential next steps after her presentation.
Great, thanks. Ms. Krishnan?
Thank you, Director Power. Thank you, Director Power, members of the commission. A brief refresher on the discussions we had at the last Planning Commission meeting. The reason this lot coverage issue was brought up before you was in response to one of the existing industrial developments within the township appearing before the Board of Zoning Appeals last month with a request to increase their lot coverage by 1%. And the reason they needed that was they were putting an overhang on the rear of their building to shelter their previously approved outdoor storage. Technically, the overhang qualifies as a structure by our ordinance, and therefore it was included under lot coverage requirements. The Board of Zoning Appeals decided rather than grant a variance, some of the case that the applicant made was reasonable and asked us to take it back to the Planning Commission for insights. We subsequently did research on lots of other communities, which I went over last time, Lyon Township, Canton, Plymouth, and Northville, and noticed that our lot coverage requirements are more restrictive than most other communities. I do believe that the lot coverage limitations of 35% for industrial districts is well placed because we want to protect our community with all the stormwater issues that constantly keep coming. So the intent of lot coverage is to control just how much of the parcel is covered by buildings. That said, we also believe that the applicant who had asked for the variance in the first place had merit in what they were requesting. So based upon that, we are proposing an amendment to the lot coverage definition in the zoning ordinance, where we clearly specify that this is for industrially zoned parcels only, as the Planning Commission wanted to make sure we did last time. So the new definition shall say, lot coverage is the part of a lot occupied by buildings or roofed structures, including accessory buildings or structures. That is the current definition. We are going to add onto it, for industrially zoned parcels located in the M1, M2, and MT zoning districts, lot coverage shall not include unenclosed roof structures that provide shelter over approved outdoor storage areas located over paved surfaces, as noted and subsequently the schedule of regulations footnote BB. There was some discussion, what happens if a roof structure is a series of solar panels or carports over existing parking for executives, or green roofs for that matter. So we made sure to add in a clarification saying green roofs, solar panels, porticos, or similar coverings shall not be allowed under this provision because those would be considered as architectural features and are not going to be exempt under this lot coverage explanation. That lot coverage required an amendment and a footnote to be added to the schedule of regulations, which is the table that guides all development within the township. And we specified over there that unenclosed covered roof structures over approved outdoor storage areas located on existing impervious surface areas shall not exceed 10% of the total lot area up to a maximum of 20,000 square feet. I added a clarification there that Commissioner Jar had brought up. What if their existing lot coverage is only 33%? What about 2% till they reach 35? So the 10% we are allowing is above and beyond the 35% that they are allowed. The reason why we said 10% or 20,000 square feet is in case of the applicant who appeared before the Board of Zoning Appeal, the variance they were asking for was 1%, and that 1% equaled 18,000 square feet. On a smaller site, even 10% would probably just be 10,000 or might even be just 5,000 square feet. So this gives ample room for even the smaller industrial developments and something that is really big, yet not exceeding what we believe is reasonable limits for lot coverage. We have clarified that such cover shall only be over previously approved outdoor storage. So any outdoor storage will need approval from the Planning Commission as is. And such a covering will not add any more impervious surface area. So basically, it's not going to add to stormwater runoff or stormwater issues. And finally, we also amended another structure which sort of ties into the industrial districts, section 5.101, accessory outdoor industrial storage. We once again specified over here that it's a maximum of 10% up to a maximum of 20,000 square feet. We want to make sure that every section of the ordinance that refers it ties into one another. So an applicant doesn't look and say, hey, under schedule of regulations, I'm allowed to do it, but under outdoor industrial storage, it does not allow me to do it. So the language is consistently being changed in all relevant sections that tie into each other. At this point, it is before you tonight for discussion. You had already taken a motion at your last meeting to set this for public hearing at your next meeting because the noticing requirements under state law are so extensive. So we have set it for public hearing. However, if there are any changes as a result of the public hearing, those can still be made. And Director Power and I would like to present this ordinance before you tonight and seek any feedback. We believe this covers all of the concerns that you raised last time, making sure it is limited to industrial districts, making sure that it does not just have unintended consequences for solar roofs and all other improvements to be included, making sure that it explains that this 10% is over and above the 35%, and finally making sure that under the accessory sections also we refer back to the schedule of regulations and the definition. So I would be happy to answer any questions you might have or provide any additional clarifications.
Thanks, Ms. Kristen. Thorough presentation. So questions or comments from commissioners? Anyone?
Madam Chair,
Sure, Commissioner Kelly.
I have a question regarding the last paragraph of number 121, where it says green roof, solar panels, porticos, and similar shall not be allowable under this provision. I know we were talking about what if they came in, decided that they wanted to put solar panels in or something else to cover. The way this is written, would that prohibit them from, say for the applicant we've been kind of talking about, if they wanted to put solar panels on top of the awning they're already building, it looks like it may be classified either as a second or a different standard or even possibly not allowable. So I guess.
Yeah, I think the way the ordinance is written, the clarification that you provided, if they were to put solar panels on top of an awning or something, it would actually qualify as part of their lot coverage requirements. Unless the Planning Commission believes that if you are approving a covering over an accessory outdoor storage area and the covering itself is a solar panel, it serves dual purpose, would that be acceptable? Would that be your question, Commissioner Kelly?
Kind of what I'm thinking is that if they want to use it for a dual purpose, where if you're putting up an awning to try to maintain storage facility or things and they want to supplement power to the facility, or they may get a benefit or could use it to help offset some of their electrical usage for the area. If you have it this way, then they could end up with a scenario where it would dissuade them from doing it.
Good point. I'm not sure. I think I need to think this through, but I'm wondering if addition of a term standalone or independent green roof solar panels, porticos, and similar covering shall not be allowed under this provision. So we are not prohibiting somebody just using a smart building strategy. If they are allowed extra accessory, the outdoor storage covering, if they want to use incorporate green building strategies into it, well, I think that would be welcome. Director Power, do you think that would address the concern if we added standalone to separate it out so that it doesn't prohibit somebody from doing something innovative?
Yep, I think that works. And I think that the intent of how this is tied together in the definition section that Commissioner Kelly is referring to, we first define simply that lot coverage is the part of a lot occupied by buildings or roof structures, including accessory buildings or structures. Then we make the specific point that there is a special exemption for some additional lot coverage credit for specifically unenclosed roof structures that provide shelter over outdoor storage. So what we're trying to say is then if we're also talking about green roofs, solar panels, porticos, as Vidya said, as Ms. Krishnan said, as standalone structures, then they would not be given the same credit. But if they're part of an unenclosed roof over a permitted outdoor industrial storage area, then they would be. So I think the word standalone solves that problem. I think it would address that appropriately.
Madam Chair, are we in open discussion?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Do we need to even have the last sentence of that paragraph about the green roof, solar panels, porticos at all? I mean, if they're allowed by the building codes, why do we want to place any restriction on whether or not a standalone unenclosed structure over a storage area should have a solar panel on it? It doesn't seem like we need to make that distinction. The rest of the code would take care of it for us. Is that? I guess I don't understand why we want to make that distinction.
That's a good point. The reason why I added that in for distinction is because green roof, solar panels, those are features that would be allowed with compliance to building code. but we are specifically referencing it under lot coverage so that a developer or a property owner does not try to exceed lot coverage under those requirements. Supposing we don't include that terminology and our intent is clearly to exclude it, tomorrow if a developer comes and suggests it, he says, your ordinance does not specifically say I cannot do it. So in that case, it becomes an interpretation challenge. They can technically go back before BZA and say, well, I'm not understanding what your ordinance is saying. I challenge the way it is written. So in order to prevent such thing, this is an extra language that is added in to avoid confusion. It's like a bit of an overkill, but it's better to be clear than to leave any room for interpretation.
I want to ask about another, the portico clause. We don't have anyone with a storage area that they want to cover that happens to have a door under the covered area, do they? Does anyone? Then it would be then their storage area covered would suddenly become a portico if it had a door.
Never underestimate the creativity. See, now if the rear of the building, if the rear of the building had an entrance, they can put a portico cover over it and extend it on both sides and store stuff underneath. Now it's outdoor storage portico.
Oh, okay. I suppose since we had a specific example with Neapco, they don't have a door in the wall that they're trying to cover, right?
We actually do, because that is the whole point. They said they want to take their outdoor storage items inside the door without snow falling all over it and slipping on the snow for safety reasons. Remember?
Right. So section 121 would specifically disallow a portico. And if there was a door under that cover, that's the definition of a portico. And suddenly our example that we're trying to fix wouldn't be allowed under the ordinance. So I think we need to look at that last sentence a little bit more.
Okay. Make sure that it's, the intent is not that if you have an awning covering, you cannot have a door underneath it.
Yeah, I know, and that's the intent. I know I think I understand the intent, but the language of it would indicate that might not be allowed, and that's why I'm concerned about that last statement about the solar panels and the porticos. Want to make sure we get it right with the intent.
We'll fine tune it. Point well taken.
I also had a question, if no one else has anything they want to talk about on that. The 10% lot area coverage and the maximum of 20,000 square feet. How did we get to 10%? Was that derived from somewhere, or is that just a reasonable number?
It's basically a reasonable number. Dan and I looked at other ordinances. They were all over the place, and we thought, based upon the fact that Neapco is asking for 18,000, but their overall addition is 20,000. It's just that little bit of it is still within their 35%. We thought the size they were proposing relative to the lot size was not unreasonable. So we sort of inferred, we worked backwards and came up with that.
We might, since we're going to be fine tuning a little bit, I think that if you look at the outdoor storage area ordinance and total lot coverage in an industrial zone, the lot coverage gets to be 35%. They can have of the lot area, and then the storage area is defined as a percentage of the floor area, like 30%. I'm pretty sure that means that the ordinance allows someone to have at least 11.5% total lot area of outdoor storage, which means we aren't allowing them to cover all of their outdoor storage if we only allow 10%. So we might want to look at, maybe since that 10% might not be the right number, maybe it's 11.5% to be consistent with the rest of the ordinances. Does that make sense?
I'll check how much of outdoor storage we allow relative to lot area, and we will try to match this up at the same time, making sure that we are not sort of opening it up to too much of it either.
Yeah, part of the problem is that the lot area coverage is determined by floor area, and then the storage area coverage is determined based on the floor area percentage instead of a percentage of the lot. And I think it can be very confusing. If we could clean it up just a little bit to, disambiguate it, make sure we aren't being contradictory, that would be great. And I can send you after the meeting the part of the ordinance that I was looking at,
Sounds good.
if that helps.
Commissioner Jar, in reference to that, can I ask you a question? Would it be your intention to allow all outdoor coverage as we're allowing it in this section for industrial to be covered? Because right now, I don't have a problem with us saying that there's a limit to how much of it we're willing to be covered.
The way I read the proposal is that it would limit the coverage to 10% of the total lot area. And then there is another limit at 20,000 square feet of total coverage. And I think that breakover point ends up being 4 acres. Did Dan or Vidya, did you guys look at it? I think it's 4 acres. If it's below 4 acres, they're covered by the 10% lot coverage. If the lot is bigger than 4 acres, they're covered by the 20,000 square feet. And I'm okay with that. I don't think having we had a 40-acre parcel with a 200,000 square foot storage area all covered, that might be excessive. But I do think for smaller lots, it would be reasonable to allow the entire permitted area to be covered. And that does bring up one other aspect of this. I think the language, the way it's written right now, I think the intent that we were going for was to allow coverage on the storage areas, but the way this is written, you could build an unenclosed structure as long as it covered part of a storage area, and you could build it up to 20,000 square feet or 10%. As long as you covered some small percent of its storage area, you could build the maximally sized cover. You could cover up a small portion of your storage area and then turn the rest of it into a parking structure. I don't think that was the intent. We might want to include some language that says the structure must be completely contained within the legally permitted storage area, so that we don't end up having people build a larger structure than their storage area, if that makes sense.
No, pardon me, but I think we are just complicating the issue. I think the intent was to allow for some amount of accessory outdoor storage area cover. It's not necessary that all of the outdoor storage areas have to be covered. And not every industrial development that applies to the Planning Commission for outdoor storage area approval might need a vast storage. Some of them might just need, say, few pallets to be stored in like 3 stacks. And then some of them might be the DTE property, which have like massive outdoor storage pallets. So I think the intent behind the ordinance was keep it flexible and fluid enough that it would provide some outdoor accessory area storage coverage, but not necessarily all of it. Some of it might still be exposed and be open. I think it will be up to the applicant to decide which are the things that have to be under their shelter within the limit that we are permitting them. My worry is if we go too much to tailoring it to one particular standard in the ordinance, another standard might pop up which we don't comply with. So I'm thinking the reason we came up with the 10% and the 20,000 is we thought if somebody gets approval for outdoor storage, say 5,000 square feet, under the 20,000 limit, they'll be able to cover all of their things. It's not that if they have a 5,000 square foot outdoor storage, that they will be allowed to build a 20,000 square foot overhang structure and use only 5,000 of it. That's not what will be allowed. The way the ordinance is written, whatever is your outdoor storage, that will be allowed to be covered up to 20,000. So you're not going to build 20,000 because you're allowed that and keep 15,000 empty for something else that you might use it for. That's not how it's.
I get it, but I think the language of the way it's proposed would allow someone to build an outdoor structure and have the entire structure waived from lot coverage, as long as that outdoor coverage, that outdoor structure covered some part of a storage area. Then the entire structure gets waived. If it doesn't cover a storage area, then the structure doesn't get waived. And that seems inconsistent. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I think that there's some looseness in the language that might allow that. I just wanted to bring it to the commission's attention.
Okay.
Dan and I will discuss it to make sure that we tighten it up, because the intent is to allow coverage only for previously approved outdoor storage areas up to 10% or the 20,000 square feet. The intent is not to allow you to build the 20,000 square feet and then use only some of it for storage. So
Yes, I agree.
We will rephrase that if that's not coming through, but that was the intent. So we will try to work on the language.
Yeah, we can look at whether it's necessary to put something in the Article 4 edit where we refer to unenclosed covered roof structures over approved outdoor storage areas. We may say something like unenclosed covered roof structures entirely within and over approved outdoor storage areas, something like that.
Entirely within. I like that. Yeah, I like that. Thanks.
We can see if that's not covered by anything else, but that may be a reasonable edit to make.
Good exchange and a little bit of wordsmithing. Other questions or comments from the commission? Anyone? Anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this agenda item?
Chair, through the chair, I did see, just so we're all being attentive, I just note that there is a chat, but there's the chat comment pertains, I believe, entirely to the senior housing ordinance that's coming up. So I do see a couple of comments from a couple of people representing NYAPCO, and they just expressed their thanks for consideration of a text amendment to address an issue that they have also. Of course, this is a broader issue, but they just say thank you for all of your time and consideration of this text amendment to help address the needs of our client. NYAPCO, they truly appreciate your efforts. That's just a comment in the chat.
Great. So Director Power, you want to talk us through the next steps in addition to some wordsmithing yet to be done?
Sure. We have a couple of things to look at with the definitions section, the sentence pertaining to green roofs, and seeing if we need to add any tightening language to the clause in the schedule of regulations. Those are both entirely possible to do in the next couple of weeks here. So on that note, we do have a public hearing scheduled for March 24th, and that will be the next step. At the March 24th meeting, we will ask that you consider a recommendation to the township board based on the final edits that we have.
Okay.
And through the chair, I did see that there is another question from the applicant, if we can read that, or not from the applicant, but from the chat window from Mr. Simez. He asks, what about putting solar panels on the existing roof? And if you don't mind, I can take a stab at answering that. I think to the broader conversation we're having, there are provisions in the zoning ordinance that separately address solar panels, and that's something that we can look at independently. This ordinance has no bearing on solar energy as an accessory use on a site.
And addition of solar panels will be reviewed under compliance with building code. It's not necessarily got anything to do with planning or zoning. That's what it's.
Okay. So it seems like we have our direction and we're through with the discussion on this item. I'll just double check. Anybody else? Anything? I would like to thank staff very much. You've done a lot of listening over the last month, listening to applicants, listening to the BZA, listening to all of the commissioners and our various ways of coming at what the possible solution is. And you've done a great job. And I'm sure you'll be able to take care of the wordsmithing that's yet to be done. And I think we'll be in good shape come the end of the month. But thank you. Good job. So we'll move now to item number 2, which is a discussion on senior housing development zoning ordinance text amendments on minimum usable floor area and signage. The proposed amendments to section 5.143 that would clarify required site minimum usable floor area in square feet per dwelling. That is for independent senior housing developments, and also revise requirements for signage in senior housing developments. So we have presentations from staff on what was allowed by BZA and then what the amendment is. So Director Power, are you up first?
Sure, I'll give a brief statement just to provide some history, and then we can, Ms. Krishnan can go through the zoning ordinance text amendments that we're presenting to you. There's a history of a lot of work on the senior housing ordinance that was written in 2019, followed by, as of right now, 2 substantial senior housing development applications. The latter of the 2, which is an independent senior housing development, has prompted a lot of important discussion. One of the points of discussion relates to how the language in the senior housing ordinance applies with respect to the minimum usable floor area per dwelling unit. And I want to read it just quickly. I'll read the language that the ordinance starts with to provide some context for our proposed amendments to clarify that language and some things that you can consider. So the ordinance for section 5.143D of the zoning ordinance states that the required minimum usable floor area and UFA in square feet per dwelling unit for independent living units is with efficiency or studio style and 1-bedroom units is 650 square feet, and for 2-bedroom dwelling units is 850 square feet. And so the crux of the conversation that we've had so far about this and the application that has driven the need to clarify this is whether we are referring to minimum usable floor area in square feet per dwelling unit as an aggregate of what a development produces in terms of both common room areas that are usable floor area for the residents and what's inside of discrete dwelling units, or as the original interpretation stood, is it space that's inside of each individual dwelling unit, that amount of square footage has to apply. And based on the direction of the BZA and reviewing the interpretation of the ordinance, we have presented a text amendment that clarifies the former interpretation, which is that we're talking about the minimum usable floor area that can be applied based on the number of units you have, the type of units you have, but can also use some common area credit. So with that said, that's enough of a basic overview of what we're reviewing tonight. I'll hand this over to Vidya Krishnan. First, we can talk about this dwelling unit size ordinance, and then we can talk about some proposed signage change in senior housing.
Thank you, Director Power and members of the board. The senior housing ordinance is not so old, but as in the case of every new ordinance, sometimes when you start applying it, you realize that there are more facets to a particular use. In this case, the applicant who appeared before the Zoning Board of Appeals contended that senior independent housing is different than an apartment type living where you have just minimum usable floor area limits for efficiencies, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and so on and so forth. In case of independent senior living, data and statistics show that seniors are more likely to use the facilities that are provided with the development itself where they live. In this case, the amenities that are proposed along with independent senior living is significant. They have their own game room, they have their movie theater room, they have their own dining area. These are spaces that are actively used by the senior residents rather than in a general type of apartment setting where people, come and go and occasionally use the rec rooms that are provided over there. So the applicant made a pretty convincing case that the BZA agreed that including a percentage of the common areas as usable floor area counting towards each individual unit. For example, we have 10 units, all of which are 650 square feet each. The BZA determined that 10% of that square area can be, a percentage of that square area can be included as part of the common areas that are provided in the building, because essentially that is usable floor area that is being used by that resident within the same building. So right now our ordinance, the way it is written, is very absolute, that usable floor area is only within the 4 walls of the unit itself. Balconies, decks, patios, and other such unenclosed or unheated spaces are not really considered as usable floor area in our ordinance. And that is a consistent explanation across all ordinances. So we are suggesting an amendment to the regulations, not to reduce the standards or change it, but to acknowledge that the common areas that occupy a significant amount of floor space in the building also count in a small measure towards the usable floor area of the unit itself. If you look at the amendment, that is, we have put in a limit of 10% once again on this, so that a developer doesn't make a unit that is like pocket sized and say, you know what, the rest of the usable floor area is all in the common rec areas. Said, okay, the units cannot become too small either. You can go up to 10% and use the common areas. As a comparison, there are other communities that I work for that have recently approved senior housing. They allow the unit sizes to go down as much as 450 square feet for efficiency units. So our standards are still much higher than that. 650 square feet is a reasonable size for a 1-bedroom or a studio unit. Now, if you look at your ordinance amendment that is in your packet tonight, the table is an example. Director Powers and I are still discussing whether we should include it as part of the ordinance, which might unnecessarily be confusing. So this is basically for discussion purposes, this particular table. Now, the first part of the table where it says site usable floor area, that shows you what the ordinance currently is. So if for a 1-bedroom unit, 10 units at 650 square feet each will require a total of 6,500 square feet of site area. Similarly for the 2-bedroom. So totally, if you have a total of 20 units, you need 15,000 square feet. What we are suggesting is the minimum unit floor size will be reduced by 10%, and that additional 10% will be in the combined common rooms or common recreational areas. So the net amount of lot area required is not going to reduce. We are not going to reduce the standards for the amount of land area that is required or make it more constricted. We are just giving recognition that and we have made it very clear that it is for senior independent living only, that this distinction is being made. This distinction does not apply to other types of apartments or other types of living or dwelling units. This particular finding is being made specifically for independent living units only. So the ordinance is suggesting the change basically is saying that some of the common areas can be included as usable floor area for the individual units. They will still have to meet all the standards that are required by the state of Michigan for their licensing requirements. So that's basically the first part of the senior ordinance that we are changing. I would be happy to discuss it, and then we'll move on to the second part where we are suggesting a change. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have with regard to this floor area change that we are proposing.
Great. Thanks so much, Ms. Christian and Director Power. Questions or comments from the commission on the usable floor area part of the ordinance amendments? Anyone?
Madam Chair.
Sure, Commissioner Jar.
In our senior living ordinance, we made a specific allotment for usable floor area. We actually made it smaller than the usable floor area for an apartment in the RM district. I thought the intent behind that was to acknowledge that senior living has a different use policy or different use method, and that common area makes up for a lot of the use in a senior living area, and therefore our ordinance acknowledged it by allowing a reduction in usable floor area by 50 square feet for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, lower than it would be in any other place in the township. I don't think the way our ordinance was written, it wasn't clear. The BZA felt that it wasn't clear that we were taking into account the increased usage of the common area in this scenario. I'm okay with updating the ordinance to make that more clear. I am wondering, however, if we're going to allow a percentage credit, I don't know if to do a credit, but a reduction or the ability to transfer some amount of common area space into the usable floor area calculation. Are we are we crediting that space twice by already allowing a lower number and then crediting a 10% addition on top of it? It seems like perhaps we are, and I'm not sure that's good. I'm not sure that's what we want to do, or if that's what the intent should be. I'm open to discussion on it. I did just want to point it out, though.
I would be happy to present some of the history of where that 650 square feet came from in the first place. When we presented the senior housing ordinance first for the Planning Commission's consideration, the 650 had nothing to do with the existing minimum usable floor areas for apartments or other types of dwelling units within the township. We researched senior housing in numerous communities in the Detroit metro area where there is recently these developments. In the last 5 years, developments that cater to the 55 plus community has really boomed. There are a lot of people who want to age in place. If you have all your life lived in a community and now you're unable to take care of yourself in your independent house, you still want to live in the same place, but you want to be in a place where it is manageable and where you can get some help if you need to. So aging in place has become a very important factor, not just in Michigan, but in the planning scene itself across the country. So when we developed the senior housing 650 square feet minimum requirement, it was not based on anything in our current ordinance. It was based on comparing ourselves to multiple other communities. I think we looked at 5 or 6 different communities, and we picked our regulations somewhat in the dead center of that. There are many other communities that are a lot more lenient than us, where the minimum unit sizes go down up to 450. And I also know of communities where the minimum unit size usable floor area goes up to 800 square feet. So we picked a middle ground for all of it. One of the requirements is to provide for common room and amenity areas, but the ordinance does not specify just what these amenities should be, because different developers who develop these senior housing have different ideas of how they market these. And in case of the township, when we get a senior housing application, we definitely pay attention to the kind of amenities that they're providing, that they have to be both active and passive recreation, especially for independent seniors. I mean, they are senior, but it doesn't mean they are not still active and want to do. For example, in case of the senior housing development that triggered this whole thing, we required bike racks. I mean, there is no reason people who are 55 and older wouldn't be interested in biking down Belleville Road. There is simply no reason for that. So we made sure that the amenities are provided. At the same time, there was no specific reason for picking 650 as a minimum, except that it happened to be middle of the range that we were looking at. So making an accommodation for 10% in lieu of providing better community facilities and better facilities for these seniors, we thought was a reasonable amendment to propose. It is not compromising on their quality of living or compromising on the standards that we want, which is why the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Planning Commission upheld our architectural standards when the applicant wanted a deviation from that. We said we are not going to reduce our BROD standards or bring down any of our architectural standards. However, we did recognize that the unit size, the case presented by the applicant, and what we looked for ourselves across community, the modification that was being proposed was not unreasonable. So it's not setting the bar lower, if I can go as far as saying that. It is just trying to acknowledge that we believe there should be increased focus on the common room areas. By actively acknowledging it in the proposed amendment, I think any future senior developments that come will realize that they need to focus on the common areas also, because those will be looked at by the Planning Commission. If you're going to say common areas matter, show us what you're doing. Just putting a huge open hall with 2 card tables doesn't cut it. It has to be actively a recreation area that seniors will want to congregate. I hope that alleviates some of the concerns. So just so we are not lowering the standards.
Yeah, that definitely is a good explanation. Are we planning on including any guidance as to what is and what isn't a common space in our apartment calculation for UFA? It's pretty clear. You only get to count what is exclusively used by the occupant of the dwelling unit. If we start allowing these common areas to be counted, how does a developer know what counts as a common area. Does the staging area outside of the elevator count if I put a couch in it? Is it a dining room? Does a dining room count? How about a storage area?
Yeah, the
How do we
ordinance,
plan to address it?
the current ordinance definition for usable floor area clearly excludes all of that. All the elevators, all the common service areas, maintenance rooms, storage rooms are automatically excluded. The moment the word usable floor area comes, those are excluded by our ordinance. So a developer cannot include any one of those. And this ordinance language also specifies that balconies, decks, patios, and other such spaces are also not going to be included. So there'll be a unit, they can have a deck, they can have a balcony, but we are still not counting the deck and the balcony as usable floor area. Common space areas will be part of the amenities that they can access. It has to be like a recreation room or a swim spa or a theater or a card room or a dining area. Usable common areas, not traffic areas such as corridors and stuff. Those are already excluded by the ordinance.
I think that's a great intent. I think the ordinance proposal ought to spell that out, though. It really ought to say these are, you know, the types of areas that are acceptable for a common space. Or we might get someone coming wanting to call out the hallway as common space because everyone can walk down it.
Sounds
make
good.
sense?
I would be happy to copy the language from usable floor area definition and include it in the senior housing also, just to remove any ambiguity or somebody wanting to do something like that.
Okay, good discussion. Anyone else? Questions or comments? Planning Commission first? Any other commissioners? Anyone in the audience?
Madam Chair, if I could,
Sure, Commissioner Jar.
I'm sorry. I have another question. The minimum floor area, the table that you had put up on the screen, I wasn't sure how you came up with the minimum. I think there's a math error in that 585 minimum. It looks like that if I take 585 square feet and I add on 10% of 585, I don't get up to I don't get up to 650.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that table as written
Yes.
might have a problem.
So I think the table is that's a good thing to look at as an illustration of what we're trying to clarify, but it probably will not be something that ends up in the ordinance.
Okay.
But I think the intent is the 10% of a 650 would be the 65 subtract from 650. So you have to make sure that there's 650 square feet of usable floor area accountable to each of the units, and only 10% of that can be credited from outside of the four walls of the unit. So within the four walls of the unit, there has to be at least 90% of the 650, and that's where the 585.
It's 585.
And so I'm sorry, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
So that basically clarified that if it's 650 square feet, 10% of 650 is 65. So 650 minus 65 is 585. So within the four walls of the unit, you have to have at least 585 square feet. And the 65.
No, I don't think, I think that's the math is wrong. I think that it's 10% above the minimum has to equal 650. That means in order to get to the minimum, you have to multiply. Now we're getting into a math discussion, but I think 650 times 1.1, it gets you to the right minimum, which is probably, which isn't 585. And that's what I'm trying to say is that this 10% is, if you do the math backwards, it can be, I'm a little worried that it's hard to calculate if that makes sense. If we take 585 and we take 10% of it, that's 585 plus 58 square feet. That doesn't equal 650. That means that 585 isn't the right minimum.
I see what you're getting at. We are starting with the 650 minimum. So maybe the table is not explained. We are starting with the 650 minimum and then doing 585 plus 65. Maybe the way it's represented over here is not mathematically correct, but that was sort of what we were trying to get across, like how small the smallest unit can be. And like Dan said, we are mostly keeping this only for explanation, but even for explanation purposes, I think it's confusing. So I see what you're making. Maybe one more column has to be added and then split to show the map.
Yeah, and I guess the intent is that the smaller one-bedroom unit is going to be allowed a smaller credit than the larger two-bedroom unit because you only get a maximum of 10% of the one bedroom. That's the idea.
Correct.
And this credit is applied it's literally on a per unit basis. It's not add up all of the usable floor area and then start. I think
Correct.
I'm having a problem with the math.
Well, in simplest terms, if you have a senior housing independent living development that simply has one single bedroom unit, there has to be 650 square feet of, well, and actually that, even then it gets confusing because you're not really in a common room, you're only having one tenant, of course, but just for example purposes, that would be one, the room itself has to have the combined square footage has to be 650. 10% of that can be outside of the walls of the room. And so that's where you'd get a 585 square foot, the walls of the unit. That's where you get a 585 square foot unit and a 85 square foot common room, which of course in a single unit development wouldn't make sense, but that's the idea.
A developer cannot total all the units, put together a common area, and then suddenly you have units that are as small as 400 square feet. No, the common area will be credited to each individual unit. You're not going to be able to create a lump sum and then just distribute it as you choose to and shrink the unit sizes.
Okay, I think the table is confusing. I think the way
Yes,
it's written
yes,
makes sense, but I think the table is confusing and the minimums aren't correct in the table and we need to look at that math. I guess that would be a concern I have with the way this 10% is written, the 10% credit seems like it's maybe complex. Is there a reason why we don't just, it's a word used just, but is there a reason why we don't lower the UFA requirements in the senior living district to account for the common area? If the number is too big, we chose a bad number in the ordinance, why don't we just lower it?
But then what would happen is some senior development, the future senior development might just decide to use the extra square footage to squeeze in more units rather than provide the common area that we want. They might say, hey, now if we can have 400 square foot units, I'm going to squeeze another 5 units in here because it's more money.
I understand it's so that you have a senior unit, the senior housing development must have some common area
Yes.
in order to take advantage of it. I understand.
Correct.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And the table is going to disappear. The table was meant for discussion purposes only. Looks like it's creating more confusion. So the table is going to disappear and we will tighten the language so everybody doesn't. You tied me up in knots, Mr. Jarno.
I am so sorry. I really am. But it's the details. And when it comes back from the BZA and the original ordinance wasn't clear and needed interpretation, boy, I don't want to have to go back and do that again. I really appreciate the work you guys put into it too. Thank you. I am done.
The concept.
All right, I'll take you at your word. Anything else from other commissioners? It did occur to me as we walked through this discussion, and I found it interesting. Really, we wrote the senior ordinance because we didn't have a way for those developers and then their customers or clients, their seniors, to fit within the ordinance that already existed. So we carved out a space that we hoped would meet what someone would be willing to build, some group would be willing to build, and then how they market it, that would also be of interest to our own residents who want to age in place. So I think we've I think we accomplished that initially in the marketing of how one developer wants to build theirs. They raised the issues and we've addressed that now. So I think we're still on target and that feels right. I also wanted to mention, I had a good conversation with Director Power after the BZA made their decision, and I had done some independent research, granted online, so you can't always believe the internet, but I looked at some surveys that our own state housing, that MISTA had done over the past 5 or 6 years. And there was a survey particularly on size of units in independent senior housing development. And I saw that there certainly were lower numbers across the board in the state of Michigan than what we had. I'm not suggesting we should lower our numbers. I think we have good numbers, but it was interesting to see what was happening in other communities. Of course, always beneficial when McKenna brings that information to us as well. So I think that's all I had to say about that. So are we ready to talk about signage?
Hopefully the signage one is simpler.
Oh,
At the,
okay.
at the time we adopted the sign ordinance, we said the sign placement shall be similar to a residential district, because we thought residential district signs are more restrictive and they are smaller. The unintended consequence, which we realized later as we were reviewing, is in residential districts, you are allowed to have a large sign at the entrance of the development, but the sign is required to be set back at a distance of 30 feet. So now if you have a development, for example, let me take Clover development. So the whole point of having something like a senior housing development is when seniors are driving, they know where to turn, they can identify where the development is. Now the sign is going to be set so far back, because 30 feet is a significant distance. If you look at single family subdivisions, it's actually going to cause an issue, because people are going to pass the development without even realizing it is there before you turn and come back. So when we looked at the regulations, we thought the underlying zoning regulations, we had redone our sign ordinance a few years ago, but it's a really good ordinance. So when we looked at the standards of the underlying zoning districts, wherever we allow for senior housing, we found, underlying zoning district regulations and requirements are very reasonable. So why not apply the standards? If a senior housing development is going into an RM district, it should follow the RM district sign regulation standards. If it's going into a C district, let it follow the C district standards. If it's going into mixed use, let it follow the mixed use, because that gives the applicant the benefit of actually making a smaller sign, but not as visible right at the entrance of the street, so people know where it is located. So that was one of the sections of the ordinance where we did not realize, when we said it should be similar to a residential district, that the ground sign actually becomes bigger and further back. So we sort of corrected it over here. However, we are still limiting the wall signage on the buildings. Last thing we want is for a senior housing to have screaming sign Hampton Manor in like 200 font size visible from far. So the wall signs will still be limited to identify the building number and the building for safety, but the road sign will be comfortable enough for residents and for citizens in the community to know what development is located at a particular. So this is basically an ordinance cleanup, because once we applied our regulations, we realized it wasn't the best way to apply it. So
Okay.
that's the simple of it.
So anyone, questions or comments on the adjustment in the sign for senior independent housing? Anyone in the audience? Seems pretty clear.
Through the
All
chair, we do have a comment from an audience member, Mr. Stephen Dark. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, but senior housing signage requirements. I believe that the township should continue having the highest possible standards for signage, especially in the BROD. Beautification should always remain a top priority. So, Mr. Dark, anybody in the audience can feel free to raise their hand and join in, but otherwise there is that comment in the chat for the Planning Commission to consider.
Great.
Yes, the sign will still comply in response to Mr. Dark's concern. The sign will still comply with the underlying district, which is located in the BROD. It will still have to meet the sign design standards. If it's a ground sign, it has to have a brick monument with architectural detail on it. So all of the requirements of the sign ordinance will still be applicable. It'll still be an architecturally pleasing sign and will have to comply with all of the requirements of the ordinance.
Great, thanks, Ms. Krishnan. All right, so our next steps on this amendment for senior independent housing.
The next steps would be that you can discuss it, deliberate on it, and then with this, along with the usable floor area amendment, we would bring back revised recommendations, and then at any point the planning commission feels comfortable, you can release us to go ahead and schedule a public hearing, because of course any zoning ordinance text amendment is going to require a public hearing and then a recommendation to the township board where they read the ordinance twice. So if you have any proposed changes, please let us know. We'll bring them back to you for further discussion.
I believe the change at this time, the planning commission asked of us is to clarify what exactly is common area and also clarify usable so that we don't have utility areas. If the planning commission is comfortable, I can go ahead and make these changes and bring it before you at the time of your public. Have the liberty to make changes even during the public hearing to tweak it before you send it on to board of trustees.
Okay, they're fairly simple clarifications. Once we don't have the table that has the confusing math in it. So how does the commission feel? Are you ready to ask for a public hearing date? And then we'll look at those, that wordsmithing on this amendment at the public hearing, or do you want to see it again before it goes to public hearing? Anyone have a preference? Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I was late to the meeting, but I am here. I just wanted to say, I feel comfortable. You hit it right on the head when you said, I think this is kind of like minor administrative wordsmithing that needs to be done. So I'm all for moving forward for the public hearing. Thank you.
Commissioner Atkinson.
Madam Chair, I agree with Commissioner Atchison. If we can get some clarification around what the common area examples are, I'm very comfortable with this. And drop the table.
Yes, sir. No more confusing math. All right. So,
Through the chair,
Director Powell.
I don't want to put all the blame on Ms. Krishnan for that one. That table was my idea. I put that together. So,
Director Power, it has fostered discussion.
yes,
Well, I'm not sure where I fall in it. I thought the table made perfect sense until I started listening to Commissioner Johnson.
that's good discussion.
All right, so we can set a public hearing date. Is that with the first meeting in April? Is that what we'd be looking at?
We could accommodate that date. Yep. That'd be the 14th.
April 14th? That's not Easter week, is it?
I don't think it is.
I think Easter's earlier.
Sure is
Yeah,
7th.
Easter's the 7th.
Okay.
Fifth.
All right, then we would need a motion to ask staff to set the public hearing date.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Kelly.
I would move to schedule the public hearing date for April 14th to address the proposed amendments as discussed.
Thank you. For support.
Support.
Support Commissioner Atkinson. And a roll call vote, please.
Joan Franzoy,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Brian Kelly,
Yes.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes, thank you. So that'll go forward and we'll have public hearings at the next 2 meetings. And again, thanks so much to staff for all the good work. We are to general discussion in tonight's agenda. Director Power, anything for general discussion?
We have at least one item for general discussion, and I think Director Best, our Public Services Director, is here. I don't know if he's ready to jump on a possible discussion item. I have a couple of minor updates as well, but Director Best, are you there?
I'm here. Hold on. I'm here.
It's very hard to hear him. I can hear him.
Hello?
A little muffled. No, we hear you.
Hello?
Hello.
Are you saying hello?
Can you hear me? Now I can hear you guys. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your time. Planning Commission, I just wanted to bring an idea that we have been talking about now for a year, since the master plan meeting that we had way back before COVID-19. We have been talking about, and COVID-19 and the economy changes have actually, and the way the internet has changed retail, we've kind of started to look at and being a little forward thinking on some of the areas of the township.
Matt, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your voice is very faint. I don't think most commissioners can hear you.
Okay, just a second.
No.
Let's try this.
Because I know the topic of Director Best's conversation, I'm going to bring up a couple of things that'll help guide where I think he's going to go here. So I'm going to pull up a zoning map and a view of a portion of the township that we've been thinking about some planning initiatives for. We'll work on that.
Problems.
While I pull these things up and while Director Best gets settled in, I'll just say we will have another meeting on March 24th. It's looking to be a quite full agenda with a zoning ordinance item and up to 3 different development review items. So that's going to be a pretty substantial meeting. And then we're going to get right into the part of the spring where construction is picking up again. And I'm sure there will be a lot of other meeting opportunities. Also around this time, we have a slew of trainings from the Michigan Association of Planning. So I'm glad some of you were able to make the one last night. If you're interested in any of the spring workshops from MAP, or if you see any other training opportunities, just let me know and we can get you set up and signed up for those trainings.
Dan, we have to take 2 classes every year, right? Did I remember that?
That's right.
Okay, from the beginning, I think that was set. Okay, so I have 1 done, 1 down. Okay, all right. Do you have favorites? Do you have suggestions of classes? Because I look at them and they all look good, or they could all be bad. But do you have a suggestion?
Well, at this point, it's hard to say. I think the township, before I was even here, did a really good job of getting everybody in the loop as far as some of the basic trainings of the Michigan Association of Planning, the planning and zoning essentials, the site plan review workshop. Those are some of the fundamentals classes. And the one that I attended last night with some of you, the risk management, is a newer one. But we look to, in short, I don't have a specific one that I have in mind, but you'll see a fairly regimented program from Michigan Association of Planning, but there's also Michigan State Land Use Extension. There may be some things available from SEMCOG and some other resources that we can link you up with. So if anything's on your radar and you're hearing from others, just let me know, and I'll let you know if I've taken the class or if Vidya or Matthew has taken the class. and we can give some feedback on it. But otherwise, just feel free to let us know ideas and we can let you know more about it and get you signed up. And
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Director Best.
Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. I apologize. I'm taking the meeting from I won't say what brand it is out of loyalty to the township, but I'm taking it out of one of my cars today. That funky system always messes up how we do things. So the township is at a crossroads because of a combination of factors: COVID, the changing of the economy through the use of the internet, and changes in some of the local areas' zoning has really changed the landscape of Van Buren Township, especially in and around the city of Belleville and around some of the areas that we have been focusing on back before COVID during the master plan. In particular, we've been looking at how we have a very strong retail corridor in the Belleville Road area north of 94. However, there's trouble finding and creating, not necessarily trouble, but it's difficult to cite new retail due to the fact that the internet and Amazon and other sources of buying items and durable goods and things, we already have sufficient stores in the area to buy those things. Plus, you can readily get it on your phone or your computer. And we also are looking at some of the changes in the zoning of the city of Belleville, which a lot of some of their businesses over the next year or two could be displaced and potentially want to find a home in Van Buren Township. We're also looking at the real strength of light industrial developments right now, and businesses such as plumbers and electricians, siding companies, sign makers, people who make widget makers, who, any little product that has a very small production capacity, but also sells their product in their showroom that's attached to their factory. There's also a strong demand for service-oriented commercial space across the region, as well as there's believe it or not, even with COVID, there seems to be a desire for more eating establishments, and not fast food, but more eating establishments and different types of eating establishments. And so the township has really the staff has really been throwing around this idea of how can we build on the economic development that's happening in the city of Belleville, build on the growth areas of the region, as well as recognizing that perhaps traditional retail isn't going to be siting in brick and mortar anymore. So tonight I wanted to throw out an idea that our staff have been working on and get you to start thinking about it, and maybe perhaps get some direction whether it's something you want us to continue to look into before we spend hours and hours developing a concept and an idea and bringing it back to you. So the idea is looking at the area south of the city of Belleville all the way to the township's southern border along Sumter Road. And this area is mostly a mixture of residential and commercial and industrial businesses north of Hull, and south of Hull, it's clearly agricultural, with the corner of the intersection of Hull and Sumter being a light commercial or local commercial corridor. What we're seeing is a lot of demand for what we are calling a super light industrial corridor that has commercial on the frontage with more like super light industrial behind it. So you have a very nice business in front, insurance company, restaurant, hairstylists, and then parking behind it. But then in addition, with a lot of open space, you have these 15,000 to 20,000 square foot facilities with storefronts that also have space behind it for their trucks to be kept inside, for their factory, for a printing company is a good example of a super light industrial use. And so we've kind of been toying around with the idea of potentially creating an overlay district for the area north of Hall Road on Sumter, south of the city, to kind of create a mixed use district, sort of very similar to what we've done in the Belleville Road overlay district, to basically create a Sumter Road overlay district. So north of Hall Road, you'd have a mixture of commercial, super light industrial, and residential uses. And south of Hall Road, you'd have more of a commercial district that's limited to certain businesses, industrial, super light industrial, so not production factories, not warehousing, not anything like that. And also allowing for the agricultural areas to continue. Of course, these are limited to the area immediately adjacent to Sumter Road. And we kind of talked about this at the master plan meetings, but I wanted to get a feel from the planning commission tonight, if that is something, answer any questions you have about the idea, but if that's something you'd be interested in us pursuing further. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and perhaps get some direction.
Great. Thanks, Director Best. Questions or comments from the commission? Anyone?
I heard more restaurants. I remember working on the new master plan, and that was something that came back from the surveys that was captured from the community, that they wanted more restaurants and not the fast food. So anything restaurant-wise, I'm all for. I'm not sure I know what light industrial is, but if it's where the market is moving or where retail is moving, I'd like Van Buren Township to be ahead of it. You mentioned Sumter Road. Is this in conjunction with the city of Belleville? Are you working with them, Matt?
Well, it's from our township line with the city all the way down to the township line with Sumter.
Okay.
And if we decided to move forward, it would be something we would work as an overlay district in a sub-area plan or an overlay district within the South Side Master Plan.
Okay.
I mean, potentially we would have to talk to the city about how it interacts with some of those areas on Hall Road between north of Hall Road on Sumter, because the city and the township kind of are intermixed there. But that's the gist of it.
Okay. Can you give me an example of a light industrial where they're making widgets, like a real?
Sure. I'll give you a great example of a business that's in the city of Belleville right now, Ahern Signs. So Ahern Signs has a commercial storefront where they sell signs, and you can walk in and get something printed. And in the back, they have their delivery truck and their giant color laser printers. And the space that they utilize is a little bit more industrial than just a commercial printing shop. It's a little heavier. They do some fabrication there, but it's not like they're making, they're not making car parts. They're not manufacturing microchips. They're making a product that's ready to sell out the front door if possible. Another example would be a plumbing company. So the plumber has his storefront that you can go and get services or buy replacement parts. But in the back is their workshop where they keep all their vehicles inside at night, and they have their repair people go out from that location. Those are two examples of what on the surface we're seeing as the super light industrial use.
And to piggyback on that, Director Best, might it even include things like maybe a catering company that makes food products, and they might have a small area up front where they sell some of their food, but they primarily are making and distributing food, that kind of thing, where you have primarily a space where you're making things, but you might be selling or bringing visitors to the site in a small portion of it.
Yeah, that's a great example. There are a lot of bakeries that site in industrial areas because of the size of the commercial kitchens that they need. So yeah, that would be another user.
It sounds great to me. You know, create the district, and you know, I can only hope that the businesses come and flourish here.
Just to add something else from my relatively new perspective as a participant in the community's planning process, I think it was wise of you all who worked on the master plan, we collectively, in saying that the south side is one area that, well, it was fairly recently master plan. There was a sub area plan in 2007 for the south side of the township. It is an area that's prioritized to take a fresh look at, especially considering the kinds of market changes that Director Best is referring to, some of the very recent movement in the city of Belleville. It's an area where specifically, even though on the one hand, you know, didn't we just adopt a master plan? Yes, but in the master plan, first of all, it's not a static set of recommendations. It's always going to be a moving process, but it also asks specifically in master plan for the south side to be looked at soon. And so we just want to help to start that conversation. And I think Director Best has a idea of kind of the primary land use scenario we want to test and start to develop with you all. And so if you can give us some direction and let us know how you feel about us moving forward with that, then we'll start getting some more movement behind that.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one more thing before somebody asks this question, because I want to be the one to say it, just in case I get quoted. This is not saying that we want to change any of the rural character of the south side of the township. This is more of a recognition of the need for future planning, so that if there is growth that is coming south toward the south side, that we can have a plan to make sure that we can protect the rural character of 99% of that of the township in the south side. We recognize that the rural character of this community is critical and important, but the economic pressure to connect that corridor may become something we want to have some rules in place before someone comes in our door and forces our hand. So we want to make sure that we have some rules in place to make it as protected as possible for our residents on the south side. So with that, I just wanted to make sure we said that.
Director Best?
Yes.
That triangle north of Hull and going into the city of Belleville, I don't have my zoning map in front of me. What is it mostly zoned right now?
The triangle?
North of Hull. We're talking about north of Hull Road, right? Up to this border of Belleville?
Right. The triangle.
It's mostly C district.
Oh, on the map?
Commercial.
What is that?
Yeah.
What is for me to see?
Is this what you're asking about? So, yeah, are you talking about
north.
west?
No, right there. A little north, right in there, just north of Hull Road, right in there. Yeah, what's that?
This is the road here. So this here is actually still, there's a mix of light industrial that grew up along the railroad. So there's still a substantial amount of property in that area that's light industrial.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, and we want to really clean a lot of that up and give it some clarity and a direction, because there's a lot of businesses in the city of Belleville and other areas that may be moving or could be moving because of some things that the city has done. This has changed in the last year or so, and in order to find them potentially a place locally, we were thinking about this might be a good way to provide a place for them to land and still stay homegrown. So, and not for any particular business, just in general.
Yeah, it looks like it's already zoned for the most part. That northern chunk is already zoned industrial. So yeah, I would think an exploration of how we could facilitate that type of growth, should it come our way, would be in order. I agree with Commissioner Atchison.
And to add to that, I like the idea, and I think that probably the market is going to move that way, that we're going to be, or that I prefer to attract lighter industrial than the heavy industrial. I know we're saturated with that. I don't think, am I right? We can't develop any more heavier industrial, right?
Well, we still have significant properties on the north side of the township for heavy and light industrial. However, the way we envision this, because the Belleville Overlay District is really a mixed use focused on residential, commercial use, residential and commercial and office technology uses, and the south side Sumter Overlay District would be more about commercial, agricultural, and super light industrial uses. They wouldn't really compete against each other. And so we would be ensuring growth for the future, not only for our corridor on the north side of 94, but also on the south side of 94, while still preserving the rural character on the south side and the more suburban feel of the north side.
I like it.
So if what I'm hearing is correct, you would like us to continue to investigate this avenue.
Medina Atchison, yes, I do. I don't know about everybody else.
Sherry Budd would be a yes. I think that would be, I mean, I think it's very worthwhile. I think it would benefit both the city and the township.
Commissioner Gyres, a yes. It's worth exploring.
Commissioner Kelly's a yes. I think it's a great idea.
Commissioner Franzo, I agree. We should be ahead of it.
Okay,
Collins feels the same.
there you go, Director Betts. I think you caught us a little bit by surprise tonight. And that's not always a good way for us to work. We like to have examples and drawings and some data in front of us. So if you can keep going and bring something back, I think we'll have a worthwhile discussion.
Yes, and that was the whole point of asking the question tonight, was before we spend the time to put together the detailed analysis that you deserve, I wanted to make sure we weren't wasting our time, because if it was something that the board had no interest in pursuing, I would have hated to have put in hours of work on something that you didn't want us to even do. So I really appreciate the opportunity to say this, get your input, and we will bring some detailed information back to the board for your future consideration. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. All right, Director Power, you had a couple of other updates for us under general discussion, or have we covered everything?
I think I've covered my updates, just keeping the trainings out there, and let me know if you see anything that you're interested in that I haven't shared with you. And then the upcoming meeting cycle, we still plan to have everything, all the meetings continuing. I'll say one other thing about meetings. We're still uncertain about the mid to long-term future in terms of virtual or remote meetings. So we're all keeping our ear to the ground on what the state legislature and governor are going to do about the change ever moving target with COVID. But for the immediate future, we anticipate still having public meetings, even though the official act that's allowing these to continue remotely expires at the end of the month. We'll be listening, and we'll let you know as soon as we know anything different. I did have one other update, which is that there's a comment in the chat going back on the topic of trainings that Marjorie Lynn had shared, that the League of Women Voters had heard a session about ethics that can be sent along. And I see the hand raised from Ms. Lynn right now, so we can bring her into discuss that.
Hello.
You are-
I had my information mixed. Charles Baxter was dealing with data from Detroit. The program I heard was from Michigan State and was called Local Government Codes of Conduct Going Beyond the Minimum with Eric Walcott from Michigan State and Tyler August. And I don't have the link for that, but it was quite interesting. And they used Planning Commission as their example. So you might, it was only an hour or so that we looked at it. So I don't know that it would qualify as a workshop or whether you even are interested, but I will get the information to Elizabeth. I'm representing the League of Women Voters here tonight.
Well, thank you, Ms. Lynn. We appreciate that. And I think we would be interested in hearing more about the connection that you had and that you found of value. All right. Any other general discussion items? Planning commissioners? Anyone in the audience? All right, lots of good discussion. If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Commissioner Kelly, thank you. Support?
Support.
Commissioner Jar. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.